Things like this usually don't happen in a community like ours. It's very tragic.
Investigators release autopsy reports today for 8 members of an Ohio family killed execution style.
We begin tonight with a deadline that has passed for the mother of 2 missing children from Rexburg.
I've been advised, to ride the wave and keep on keeping on, and that's what I've done, and it's worked out great this far.
Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Amanda. This channel we talk about all things true crime related. I just wanted to give a quick last video on the Crystal Rogers case. Seems like a lot of people were unaware that this trial was happening, probably because it wasn't being streamed, but I saw a recent spike in downloads over just like the verdict episode, so I thought I'd bring all the details that we learned to paint a picture of what I think the prosecution proved happened to Crystal Rogers. Remember, I'm no expert in this case, though sometimes I feel like it with how much I've read about it in the last 10 days, or any other case. If I missed something that you felt was important, please feel free to comment below. You can send me a message. My social media links will be in the comments, or in the podcasting app, there's like a send me a text little link you can click and send me something. Like I said, there were no cameras in the courtroom, so we're just relying on the notes of those that were in person in the courtroom. Now, we learned a lot from the digital footprint of everyone involved in this case, but we do have to rely on some witness statements, and I know that witness testimony isn't always reliable, especially when a lot of those people who are testifying have a lot going on in their own lives. A lot of those that we heard from on the stand were doing drugs or were addicted to them at the time that this took place, so some of their stories may not always be the most believable, but I also wonder if exactly why Brooks Houck chose Stephen and Joseph Lawson to help him. I don't know him personally, but when push comes to shove, I believe that Brooks Houck thought he was smarter than everyone, and he could have just gotten away with this, that some people would have just taken his word, and that was just that he said this is what happened, and that's what happened, and nobody would look into it anymore. Closing arguments by Joey's lawyer, he called Joey a fool and a drug addict. He said that a sophisticated businessman like Brooks Houck wouldn't hire somebody like that. But I think that's wrong. I think that Brooks Houck and his entire family, in my opinion, preys on people they can take advantage of. Now we're going to start off in June of 2015. Records show that Brooks Houck, Steve Lawson, and Steve's wife at the time, Tammy Lawson, were all contacting different tint shops. It's also in June that Rosemary Houck, she is a Brooks Houck mother, and she reportedly did not like Crystal Rogers. It was said during the trial that she could be heard talking about her hair and basically thinking that Crystal was beneath Rosemary and her family. But in my opinion, Rosemary Houck looks like the type to hate someone for their hair. She's a grown-ass woman hating on another grown-ass woman for her hair, as if she doesn't have better things to be doing. There were multiple times during the trial that prosecutor Shane Young straight up called Rosemary Houck and Nick Houck co-conspirators, saying that they knew what happened, and I'm here for it. At the end of June, like I was saying, Rosemary approached one of Brooks's workers, Danny Singleton, a gopher who had worked with Brooks for about 10 years. Apparently a gopher is somebody who just runs things for you. I guess that makes sense. According to Danny, he said that she came up to him on a job site and said she wanted to find someone to get rid of Crystal. And Danny told her, with enough money, you can get anything done in Nelson County. The prosecutor argued that it was at this moment when Rosemary brought up getting rid of Crystal that the conspiracy had begun. Then, on July 2nd, Brooks went to get his window tinted after a shop called him to let him know that they had a cancellation and they could fit him in that day. The prosecution would say that this was part of Brooks's plan. We would also learn about the last day Crystal was seen. She had a friend over in the morning where they talked about getting pizza later, but Crystal said that she couldn't because she had plans with Brooks for a kid-free night. She also ran into a cousin at Walmart around 3:45 p.m., talking with her about how she was looking forward to that night, especially since things between her and Brooks were a little rocky lately. A receipt that was found in Crystal's purse showed she checked out of Walmart at about 4:30 p.m. From there, she would take her 3 middle children to her father's house. If you're new to this case, Crystal would have an older daughter. She was 14 at the time her mom disappeared. And then she had 3 other children with her ex-husband, Roger, and she had 1 son that she shared with Brooks. Now, while Crystal was going about her day, Brooks' cell phone data showed he arrived at the family farm around 9:30 a.m. and he stayed there until about 4 p.m. Now, this doesn't match what he would later tell police, but we'll get into that when he has his interview with them. Nick Houck, Brooks's brother, was also mentioned a lot during this trial. His ex-girlfriend Amber would testify that her and Nick lived on the same street as Crystal and Nick's, called Glenview, but they didn't see each other much. She said that day, July 3rd, Amber and Nick were moving into a new home and Amber was not happy about it. She said that the home that they lived in was nice and she wanted to stay there, but their new place, which needed a lot of work, was supposed to be a place where the couple could live, fix it up, and then sell it for money. Instead of helping Amber move, Nick told her that he was going to help his brother that morning. He left around 9 a.m. saying he was headed to work on some of Brooks's rental properties. Brooks has owned a lot of them, like 83, I believe it was. But according to Amber, Nick went completely MIA. She said that she started moving their things on her own and she kept calling him, but every call went straight to voicemail. She said she even had to ask her dad to come help because Nick was nowhere to be found. She testified that she called him about 15 times that day, including before she went to bed and when she woke up. He still wasn't home. She testified that was the first time he had just not come home at night. Eventually, she found his phone turned off at the new property. When asked, she said he didn't really give a reason why his phone had been there. She thought it might have been because they were fighting about the move. Cell phone data reports showed Nick's cell phone wouldn't turn back on until July 4th at 1:47 p.m. Now we'll get back to Brooks and what he was doing. Like I mentioned earlier, he was at the Houck family farm all day until 4 p.m. From there, he went to the lumber store before he returned back to his home on Glenview around 4:45 p.m. Now, the prosecutor shared that after Brooks returned home, his truck was seen driving around, and Shane Young said he wasn't sure where he was going or what he was doing, but that his phone was at home. Crystal would arrive back at their home around 5:30 p.m. Kaylee, Crystal's oldest daughter, would be there with her, Crystal, and baby E until about 7. Now, side note, if you haven't seen any of my other videos or listened to my podcast, I do refer to Crystal and Brooks' son by his government name as little as possible. Only like 12 or 13 years old right now, and at the time this happened, it was 10 years ago, so he was 2 or 3, and I don't think he needs his business out there. His father was just convicted of the murder of his mother. I think that's enough. So I just refer to him as E. I did see that he was actually in court on the first day, which was jury selection. Now, at about 7 p.m., Kaylee went to her grandmother's, while Brooks, Crystal, and their son E left to go to the family farm before arriving there around 7:30 p.m. Now, another side note, anytime I refer to the farm, I'm talking about the Houck family farm unless I say otherwise. Phone data shows Crystal was active on her phone and responded to people via Facebook Messenger and was playing games until her phone died at 9:23 p.m. Reports show that her phone briefly turned back on at 11:57 p.m. but shut off within the same minute. Brooks' cell phone data was presented and showed him leaving the farm at 12:07 a.m. and that he received a phone call from Steve Lawson, an employee of his, and that came in at 12:08 a.m. His phone then showed that it connected to Wi-Fi at the old Kentucky State Campground for about 15 minutes. But during his trial, the defense put on a witness to dispute this, claiming that it could have just been the phone attempting to connect to Wi-Fi to reserve battery power, and that it was just basically showing an error, him being connected there for so long. Now, this is when the prosecution says the window tint comes into plan. They believe Brooks had his windows tinted prior to her disappearance so that when he was leaving the farm, no one could see inside the truck or could see who was not inside the truck when he was leaving. Cell phone data would show that Brooks returned home at 12:20 a.m. Backtracking a little, between 10 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. on July 3rd, Crystal's car was seen on the shoulder of the Bluegrass Parkway. At least 2 witnesses testified at trial to seeing it. One of them saw the maroon Impala parked there with a white car in front of it a little bit. And then another one saw it on the shoulder and saw that a truck with a trailer was in front of it. One of the witnesses also said that they saw it while they were coming back on the Bluegrass Parkway in the morning of July 4th. Now, during Brooks' trial, a big witness for the prosecution, he also testified at Steve Lawson's trial, but not for nearly as long, and that was Charlie Gardley. He was a friend of Joseph Lawson's, and I guess he was a worker of Brooks. He said that on the night of July 3rd, that he and Joey were at a party for the holiday. At one point, they left to go to Brooks' house, where Charlie got his paycheck, and he witnessed Brooks hand over keys to Joey Lawson. The prosecution believes these keys were Crystal's. Joey would tell Charlie that Brooks needed him to do some work on the car. He testified that Joey made some comments to him prior to Crystal's disappearance, saying he would bury it with a skid steer and no one would find it. Charlie would also say that Brooks approached Steve saying that Brooks wanted to get rid of his old lady. And then another time, Charlie would say that they were discussing more about Joey getting rid of Crystal's body, and he said he would pull her teeth and the hogs do the rest. Charlie also said that Joey had called him on the night of July 3rd after they went to Brooks' house and asked him to come to the Bluegrass Parkway and bring his trailer. But he told Joey that he was too drunk and couldn't drive. Now, I want to say here that I could see Charlie having more to do with this than he let on. Oftentimes we see that with people where they downplay their roles in it. He could have had some sort of immunity. I know that Steve Lawson was offered something. We'll get into that at some point. But I don't know. That's just my opinion. It seems like a witness saw someone out there with a trailer. It's a coincidence that he called Charlie and asked him to meet him out there with his trailer. But if he was out there, why was the car left out there? Wouldn't they have moved it? But a few weeks after Crystal's disappearance, Charlie said Brooks invited him over to the family farm to pour concrete. And during that, Rosemary allegedly said that they would have been better off if she had been gone a long time ago. Now, there was some doubt put by the defense to try and show that Charlie was not reliable due to multiple stories he told police regarding what he knew. Like I said in the beginning, witnesses, they did not have a perfect past, and I think that is what's happening a lot in this town. We also heard from 2 coon hunters at trial who were out on the property that borders the family farm. They testified that they saw a white Buick out there that night in really an odd spot that brought attention to it in the middle of nowhere, really. Brooks' cell phone records would show that around 9 a.m. on July 4th, he placed a call to Crystal. He would try again at noon on July 4th, but both calls would reportedly go to voicemail. His location data would also show him returning to the farm on July 4th. But Crystal's family was much more worried than he was that they couldn't get a hold of her. They would grow more and more concerned as the 4th turned into the 5th, and Crystal was just not responding, even to her children, and that was not usually something she did. We learned that her children, family, and friends would call and text Brooke also during this time frame, but none of them heard back. But we do know that he answered a call from someone. His mother, Rosemary. Crystal's daughter, Kaylee, she was one of the first ones to signal a red flag. She texted her mom on July 4th asking if she could go to her friend's house, and when she didn't hear back, Kaylee would text Brooks, but like I said before, he didn't respond to anyone but his mama. She would end up going to her friend's house, and when she would eventually return home, she would walk into her mother's bedroom that she shared with Brooks, and she found Brooks laying in bed. Once he saw her, she testified that he jumped out of bed like she was startled that she was there, and Kaylee asked Brooks where her mother was, and Brooks told her that she was with Sabrina, one of her cousins. I think Sabrina was her cousin. And on July 5th, Crystal's mom, Sherry Ballard, saw Brooks and flagged him down to pull over at a gas station. She testified that she wanted to speak with him about where Crystal was, and now we know that he wasn't returning anyone's phone calls or text messages, so I'm sure anybody would try to flag him down to ask questions. She testified that the moment she saw E without Crystal there, she got worried. One thing we would hear over and over again during both trials is how Crystal always had E with her, like everywhere, core, everywhere. Everyone said that Crystal was a good mother. Even a woman who came on the stand to testify that she didn't really like Crystal, and she would later testify to a conversation that she had with Brooks. She said that Crystal wasn't her cup of tea, but she did say that Crystal was an amazing mother. So Sherry told Brooks she was going to report Crystal missing to police, and he looked at her and said, "I think you should." And that was that. Crystal's father, Tommy Ballard, and her brother, Casey, went to the Nelson County Sheriff's Office to report her missing, and while there, they learned that Crystal's maroon Impala would have been spotted on the Bluegrass Parkway near mile marker 14. When Tommy and Casey got to the car, they saw that it had a flat tire. They came to the conclusion that it appeared that the flat tire happened while the car was in motion, like you could see the marks on the road that made it when it popped, you know what I'm talking about? And it didn't look like a situation where the tire went flat after the car had parked, like if it had been staged. The keys were still in the ignition, and her purse and her cell phone were found inside. Her cell phone was reportedly dead, even though there's a charger inside of the car. No one in Crystal's family believes she would have gotten out of the car and walked anywhere. The entire situation didn't make any sense to them. Cell phone records would show that Brooks attempted to call Crystal around 6 p.m. on July 5th and sent her one single text message that read, "Everyone is worried sick. Please call me back." So 3 phone calls and 1 text message in 36 hours. So at this point, we made it to Sunday, July 5th, but I want to go back a little bit to talk about what a neighbor of Crystal and Brooks saw. I know it's hard where I keep jumping around, but it's hard to get all the information. A lot of it came out beforehand, but we found out some of this after too. She testified that she usually spoke with Crystal every day, and she did so on July 3rd. She said that the next morning she woke up on July 4th in the morning between 6 and 7 a.m., and she noticed that Crystal's car wasn't at their house. This stood out to her because she knew Crystal was not an early riser. She also testified that over the weekend of July 4th and 5th, she saw Rosemary and Nick at Brooks' house, which is not something that she saw a lot before Crystal disappeared. She said that while there, she saw Nick turn around both his police cruiser and his mother's car so that the trunks were facing the basement. She testified she saw Nick carry 4 bags from the trunks into the house. She testified that these were white bags, but not trash bags. She also testified that she saw Rosemary dumping out Crystal's purple flowers, and the prosecution stated they believed she did this because she knew Crystal wasn't coming back. Now back to the timeline, we're up to about July 8th. Brooks was asked to come in for an interview with the Nelson County Sheriff's Office with Detective John Snow. Part of this interview would be leaked to the media when the Nelson County Sheriff's Office was sending it to the Bardstown Police. They aren't sure how it happened, but they know that's when it took place. During this interview, Brooks told Detective Snow that he, Crystal, and their son went to the farm. When they got there, they got out, fed some cows, and walked around. Detective Snow questioned this, pointing out that it was raining that night. Brooks responded by saying that they had a fire going, but it was controlled by the rain. Brooks was becoming frustrated that his answers did not seem good enough for Detective Snow and asked him what he could do to help clear his name. So Snow told him to write out a statement of everything that he did that day. So Brooks started to write out a statement, and while he was doing so, Snow took his phone to review it. It took Brooks 90 minutes to write out a detailed statement of what he did on July 3rd. Detective Snow came back into the room. He asked Brooks about a phone call that came in at 12:08 a.m. Brooks said that this was from Steve Lawson, a worker of his, and right there in the interrogation room, Brooks called the number in front of Snow. Once he was available to do some work for later that week because his skid steer was broken. His skid steer. Brooks asked Steve why he called him the night of July 3rd. Steve told Brooks that he was calling about rental property for his stepdaughter who was being evicted. At his trial, Steve's stepdaughter would actually testify that she never asked Steve to reach out or to help her find any place to stay. Brooks then asked Steve what Brooks told him, which is weird as fuck that you had to ask somebody that you spoke with 5 days ago what your response back to them was. And Steve said that Brooks told him that he would have to speak with Crystal about the rental properties and give him a call back. Once Brooks got off the phone, looking all satisfied, Detective Snow asked him why he needed to speak with Crystal and get back to Steve if Crystal was in the truck with him that night. Brooks dismissed that question by saying Crystal usually didn't like to talk about work that late, or maybe their son E was sleeping, so he kept the conversation brief. However, earlier in that interview, Detective Snow questioned about how late the three of them left the farm at 12:08 a.m., pointing out that E must have been tired by then since he was like only 2 or 3 years old, but Brooks said no, his eyes were wide open. Snow would ask how his relationship with Crystal was, and Brooks said that they shared some problems but always found their way back to each other. Now, two people, Sherry Ballard and another co-worker of Crystal's, would testify that Crystal accused Brooks of cheating on her within the week she disappeared. We really didn't hear too much more about that, though. Brooks told Detective Snow that when they got home on the night of July 3rd, he went to bed while Crystal stayed up playing games on her phone and their son stayed up with her. He said when he woke up on July 4th, later than he usually did, around 6 a.m., he said that his son was in bed with him, but Crystal and her car were gone. He told Snow that he wasn't worried because Crystal and her friends sometimes had these fantasy parties and she had gone to them before. During Brooks' interview, his brother Nick called him, and at that time, Nick was an officer with the Bardstown Police Department. I've probably said that before. He called Brooks while he was in the middle of the interview and basically told him to end the interview and stop cooperating. Detective Snow would later testify that Nick wasn't even on his radar as being involved until that phone call. Brooks would end the interview shortly after Nick's phone call, and then he would leave the police station. Video surveillance captured Brooks entering the family farm, followed by Nick's police cruiser. During the trial, we also heard another interview that Brooks did fairly on, either the 7th, 8th, or 9th of July, when he would be asked, what was the worst thing that ever happened to? And Brooks couldn't even answer the question. He couldn't even fake caring that Crystal was missing. Now, Detective Snow testified that while reviewing the surveillance footage of the interview, something police routinely did, he noticed Brooks adjusting something in his pocket. It turned out to be a voice recorder that was being used to record the interview. Detective Snow said he wasn't aware of this during the interview or at the time because he walked in the interview room after Brooks. Snow also noticed that after completing his written statement, Brooks read it out loud to himself. Snow was asked if this was something that people normally do, reading their statements out loud to themselves, and he said no. The prosecution insinuated that he did this to record it. Cell phone data would show that July 8th would be the last digital contact between Brooks, Steve, and Tammy Lawson. I'm sure Steve and Tammy continued to talk, but between the three of them, they were all talking about tin shops. They were contacting each other. At one point, Tammy and Brooks were contacting each other, from my understanding, but by July 8th, that had ended. The following day, July 9th, Nick Houck was asked by Detective John Snow to come in for an interview, but he declined. However, the Bardstown Police Department brought in his police cruiser and it was searched by the Kentucky State Police. Nothing was found during the search other than a blanket, and I didn't really see much about this blanket other than a recording where Rosemary was talking to Brooks about it and he seemed concerned. That same day, Brooks did an interview with Nancy Grace, which was later introduced at trial. During that interview, he repeated that they returned home from the farm, he went to bed, and Crystal stayed up playing on her phone. He also said that he wasn't worried when he woke up because she had been known to leave in the middle of the night to stay with her cousin Sabrina. Later, we learned that Sabrina said this only happened one time, and when she did come over, it was an issue that she was having with Brooks. She brought baby E with her at the time. Then on July 10th, the two coon hunters who had been out on the evening of July 3rd, they were talking, and they remembered seeing that white Buick out there in the middle of nowhere, so they decided to pass that tip along to Casey, Crystal's brother. The family started searching for Crystal immediately, starting around where her car was found, and every weekend her dad would be out there looking for her. He created Team Crystal, a group of dedicated helping searchers that included volunteers of both human and canine form. Crystal's daughter said Tommy dedicated a lot of his life making sure people never forgot her name. After Nick declined the first interview with Nelson County Sheriff's Office, his boss, the Bardstown Police Chief, ordered him to sit down with them. During the first meeting, Nick took a polygraph test, and when he was asked, he said he wasn't sure what he and his brother discussed on the family farm on July 8th. Nick was called back in about a week later, and he was told that he failed his polygraph test, specifically the questions related to what happened to Crystal. He pushed back, saying he didn't care what a test said and insisted that he didn't know anything. However, this failed polygraph was not mentioned in court because, as most true crimers know, or if you don't know, polygraph tests aren't admissible as evidence. In just a few days of Crystal's disappearance, an employee of Brooks called in a tip to Nelson County Sheriff's Department. However, the Sheriff's Department said they received over 1,000 tips in the first week and couldn't get through them all. This employee later went in person in October 2015 to report what she had seen. She would testify at trial. In the days leading up to Crystal's disappearance, she saw Steve Lawson riding around in Brooks' truck with him. She had made an error at one of the properties while they were working on a home, and Steve was supposed to be telling Brooks about this, so she was paying attention to Steve communicating with Brooks. She was worried that Brooks was going to be upset, so she was watching them as they talked in the truck. Steve got out of the truck. She asked him what they talked about, and he told her, "I've got to take care of something. I've got to take care of this girl. She's got 5 kids, and she's not doing real good." When she asked if he meant rehab, he replied, "No, I wish that was the case." Then also in October, the Bardstown police chief held a press conference where they publicly announced that Brooks Houck was a person of interest in the disappearance of Crystal Rogers and that he had fired Nick Houck. He said he did so for failing to cooperate with the investigation, stating the department had lost trust in him as a police officer. At some point, a grand jury was called. I would think this was more for fact-finding than to indict someone at the time. During those proceedings, Danny Singleton, the one who worked for Brooks, testified. He told the grand jury that he was at a bar in Louisville, Kentucky on the night of July 3rd, but later, on December 16, 2015, he was arrested by the Nelson County Sheriff's Office for perjury. He would later admit to lying. He hadn't been at the bar, but instead he was home doing drugs with a friend. He said he lied because he was afraid he was going to get in trouble. Now, at that point, Danny was in jail on a $300,000 bond, and he was facing up to 20 years in prison while investigators came to speak with him again. Now, I want to mention that the first few times investigators came to speak with Danny, he told them that he didn't know anything about Crystal's disappearance. But in April of 2016, Danny spoke with investigators, and that's when he shared with them that time that Rosemary came to him and talked to him about getting rid of Crystal. Danny said he didn't think Rosemary was directly asking him to find someone, but that it was more of a broad statement. Then, after Danny spoke with investigators, his charges were reduced to misdemeanors and he was released from jail. On April 28, 2016, Crystal's dad, Tommy Ballard, made a Facebook post if anyone knew anything about a white Buick that had been seen near the Houck family farm on the night of July 3rd. The post led to Tommy being notified that Anna Whiteside's Brooks' grandmother owned a white Buick. Police would obtain a search warrant for Anna's property. When they arrived, they did not find the white Buick. They saw a different car with a temporary tag indicating that it had just been purchased. Investigators learned that the Buick had been sold to a dealership in Louisville on May 1st, just days after Tommy's Facebook post. Surveillance footage showed Anna and Nick at the dealership selling the car, and it was noted at trial that Nick didn't want the dealership that he brought it to enter the car for appraisal for when they were trading it in or whatever the transaction was. I'm unclear if she bought a new car there or if she just simply sold a Buick. The car was processed for hairs and any other potential evidence, according to the detective's testimony. A hair was found in the trunk on the left side, and it was determined to be the same color and have the same characteristics as Crystal's, but there wasn't enough DNA to conduct a DNA test. It was confirmed that the hair did not appear similar to Anna Whiteside's. Anna has since passed away, and her daughter testified at trial. She is the aunt to Brooks and Nick on their father's side. She said that Anna and Nick had a very close relationship, but that Rosemary and Brooks did not get along with their mother. Once the car was processed, a detective in the case arranged for a cadaver dog to assist in May of 2016. The dog named Ranger was brought into a lot of 10 vehicles, and he ended up alerting to the trunk of Anna Whiteside's car. Then, on November 19, 2016, Tommy Ballard was getting ready to go hunting with his grandson, Crystal's son, on a property right off the Bluegrass Parkway, and he was shot once in the chest and killed. The cause of death is ruled a homicide, and it still remains unsolved to this day. There's been a lot of chatter about his death being related to his efforts pushing forward Crystal's case, but no one has been charged at this time. The case slowed down for a while until around 2020 when the FBI stepped in and took over the investigation. That's when more interviews were conducted, and in some cases, people were re-interviewed. So the IRS, who actually had gotten involved in the case as far back as 2016 when Detective Snow was curious to see if there might have been some financial motive for Crystal's death, well, they searched Rosemary's property in August 2020. During that search, investigators found 3 voice recorders. That's when they discovered that the Houck family had been secretly recording conversations with police, with each other. You know, in one of them, Rosemary discusses the blanket that was found in the back of Nick's cruiser, and even some of them were them recording their own grand jury testimonies back in 2015, which is illegal. Well, those recordings weren't found until 2020, and they fall into a 1-year statute of limitations for the recording of the grand jury testimony. So by the time that they're discovered, like I said, in 2020, it was too late to pursue charges. Still, it raises the question, why secretly record these things if you're not trying to get your story straight? A neighbor of the Thompson Hill property was also interviewed. The property, owned by Jeremy Thompson, was allegedly being used as an illegal dumping ground. People would pay to dump things, and then they would either burn or bury them. This witness testified to unusual digging that went on for about 2 weeks following July 3rd on the opposite side of the property where dumping usually happened. It should be noted that Jeremy Thompson passed away in 2022 and has never been charged with any crimes related to Crystal's disappearance. Steve Lawson's ex-wife was also interviewed. She is Joey's stepmother, and at the time, Joey was dating her daughter, and they had a child together. She told investigators that in 2019, she overheard Joey and Steve talking about being paid $50,000 for moving a car. She said she later confronted Joey about this, and he told her that it was true. But if she wanted more details, she was going to have to ask Steve. She also testified to hearing Joey tell Steve during one of their arguments that if he keeps up, Joey's going to tell everyone about the car and Steve's involvement. In 2021, Steve's ex-girlfriend Heather was interviewed by the FBI. At the time, she didn't mention anything related to the case. She was interviewed again in 2023, and the transcripts of that were read in court. Side note real fast, her testimony can be a little bit confusing because she met with the FBI multiple times. At one point, she recanted information, then she met with them again. It's just some back and forth. She did tell investigators that she had once shared a car with Steve Lawson, a Chrysler 300, that she said she kept after they split. However, at one point, Steve Lawson had ended up taking the car from her, but she saw it again on the night of July 3rd, and she had a spare key, so she took it back. She also said that she had the car in her possession on July 4th, which is important to note because Brooks's attorney would discuss how Joseph and Steve were on Boston Road, which is parallel to the Bluegrass Parkway, not on the Bluegrass Parkway. They were getting this car that she had taken back the night before, but she, like I said, woke up and it was in fact in front of the home on Boston Road where she was staying. She said she cleaned out the car that day on July 4th because it was full of needles and a Louisville little slugger bat. She said at one point she wrote a letter to the Kentucky State Police basically recanting everything she said, and this the defense would use to challenge her story. But she would testify that she eventually spoke with investigators again about the car and testified before a grand jury. She also told them that in 2017, she and Steve Lawson had reconnected, and while she was at his house doing drugs that she got from Joseph Lawson, she overheard Steve and Joey talking about moving a body. And at trial, she said, "The truth is, I overheard Steve Lawson and Joseph Lawson talking about moving a body at the Houck farm with a skid steer." She said she didn't bring any of this up until she told investigators in 2023. Now let's focus a little more on Steve Lawson. We learned about his cell phone data from the night of July 3rd. It showed that his phone was pinging near Dimmery Drive, which is close to a bar, around 10:30 p.m. From there, it was bouncing off towers along the Bluegrass Parkway before he eventually headed back towards Bardstown and would end up on Thompson Hill Road. There was no cell phone location data for Joseph Lawson that night. Even though he had made several phone calls to his father, nothing showed. Crystal's phone also didn't have any location data from that night. She reportedly was using a second-tier provider, and this was back in 2015, so it wasn't great. She also didn't have her Google location services turned on. Police would begin piecing together the call patterns. They found that Joseph Lawson made multiple phone calls at night to both Steve and Tammy Lawson. At 12:04 a.m., a 3-minute phone call was made between Joseph and Steve. This was followed by a series of short calls between Joseph, Steve, and Tammy that continued to about 1:08 a.m. The prosecution had said they believed Tammy Lawson had some knowledge of this crime, but she has passed away back on July 4th, 2017. I don't really know much beyond that. I've seen some things on Reddit where she shot herself and then she had an overdose. I'm not really sure. I haven't seen many people from the area talk about it, so if you're from the area, feel free to weigh in below if you've heard anything about her death. I want to point out that there are tons of searches done on multiple properties in this case. The Houck family property, Rosemary's house, Nick's house, Brooks' car, Brooks' home, Nick's cruiser, the white Buick, Crystal's car, and Brooks' rental property. And not much was found throughout any of these searches over the years. There were 2 hairs found in Crystal's car, but they didn't match any of the suspect's color or characteristics, and DNA could not be done on it. Like I said, there was a hair found in Anna Whiteside's trunk that matched the consistency to Crystal's, but DNA could not be done on it. A thumbprint was found in Crystal's car, and I believe on her cell phone, and that could not be matched to anyone. Another one of the searches of Brooks's rental properties, it turned up a woman's shirt and underwear, and that did not have enough DNA to be tested if it was Crystal's or not. Now, Steve Lawson's trial was the first to begin, kicking off in late May of 2025. He was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with evidence. His trial was separate from Brooks and Joseph's due to statements that he made to law enforcement. At one point in 2023, I believe it was, Steve had been working on making a deal with the prosecution that included immunity. However, the prosecution later stated that Steve lied to them about his role during the negotiation process, so they rescinded their offer. The court planned to present those statements during their trial, but Joseph and Brooks would not have been able to confront or cross-examine the testimony since there was no guarantee that Steve would take the stand. So based on that, the court had to separate the trials. Much of the evidence presented during his trial I've already mentioned, but his trial focused more on the Bluegrass Parkway and if he was there or not. His defense would admit that he had actually helped moving the car, but he denied any part of the plan of murdering Crystal. During Steve's trial, he took the stand in his own defense. He testified that Brooks had approached him about finding someone to kill Crystal. Steve said that he told Brooks that he wasn't the guy for that and that he should speak to Charlie Gardley, the man who was with Joseph Lawson that night. Steve admitted that he agreed to help move Crystal's car, though. He said he got a phone call from his son, Joey, who said he got a flat tire on the Bluegrass Parkway. Steve said he drove to the Bluegrass Parkway to get Joey, and once there, he testified that he had moved Crystal's driver's seat forward because Joseph was driving. He moved it forward to make it look like Crystal was driving, and that he also removed a small Louisville Slugger bat that Joey had kept on him for protection. He then returned to the Thompson Road farm. After a 4-day trial, Steve Lawson was found guilty, and following the sentencing phase, the jury recommended a 17-year sentence. He's due back in court on August 16th to officially be sentenced. During the second trial, the prosecution presented several witnesses who contradict the versions of Brooks' story that he wrote on that 5-page statement of what he was doing on July 3rd. A few individuals on his list testified that they could not have met with him that day because their offices were closed for the holiday weekend. Another said that it had been raining that day, so Brooks couldn't have been doing outdoor work with him. An owner of a Radio Shack testified that she had sold Brooks a voice recorder on July 6, 2015. She said that he came into the store with his son and asked for the best one that money could buy. She said that she kept all the receipts of that until 2020 when she spoke with investigators. Steve's mother and Joseph's grandmother would also testify at both trials, telling each jury that in 2022, Joey had come to her and told her that Steve had killed Crystal. He also described that Joey and Steve had a very toxic relationship. While Steve took the stand in his own trial, neither Brooks nor Joseph testified in theirs. However, Brooks' sister Rhonda did take the stand for Brooks, and we learned a few things, though whether they're true or not is left up to interpretation. She testified that he has an underdeveloped optic nerve in one of his eyes, and that was the reason Brooks gave for getting their windows tinted. She also said that she has been making medical decisions for E for the past 21 months, which I took to mean that she was taking care of him and he was in her custody. Rhonda admitted that she recorded her grand jury testimony, but claimed it wasn't because Nick or Brooks told her to, but simply because she was paranoid and she just wanted to remember what she said and what she didn't say. She also said that she didn't know that others in her family have recorded their statements. As of now, she testified that Nick works for an armored car company and he manages his rental properties, since we know he no longer works as a police officer. She also mentioned that back in 2015, there were no hogs on the farm, but there were only little piglets that were pink with black spots. This was in reference to the statement Joseph made about feeding Crystal to the hogs, or the hogs doing the rest. Brooks and Joseph's trial ended with both being convicted, Brooks with murder as principal or accomplice and tampering with evidence. Joseph was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with evidence after just 4 hours of the jury deliberating. Then they moved into the sentencing phase, where the jury recommended Brooks Houck serve the maximum sentence, life in prison for the murder of Crystal Rogers. The jury recommended Joseph Lawson serve 20 years for the conspiracy to commit murder charge and 5 years for the tampering with evidence. They recommended those be served consecutively. Their official sentencing is scheduled for August 21st, and I'll make sure to bring you those updates when it happens. I did want to add that the prosecutor for this, Special Prosecutor Shane Young, did not do a press conference after the verdict, which is kind of unusual. I mean, no one's forced to, but it seems like something that usually they do after a victory like this. But maybe we'll see some more arrests in this case. So, like I said, I think this wraps up my coverage for the Crystal Rogers case. I'm so happy for her family that they're able to find some sort of justice. I truly hope that there are more arrests in this case. By the evidence presented, it seems, at least in my opinion, that more people knew about this. And I hope that one day Crystal's remains are found. Although at this point, that sadly seems unlikely. Until the next video, stay safe out there. The world's an ugly place.